This is Sara with Posh Pooch Designs, and today's video I want to answer the question that I got this week, and it was, how do I crochet using more than one strand of yarn? And the other question that I got is, why would I want to? So I'm going to try to answer both those questions in this short little video. So basically, when you're crocheting with more than one strand of yarn, you crochet exactly the same. You will need a larger hook, and what you'll do is you can either roll your yarns out into balls. Sometimes I'll take a skein of yarn and roll it into 2 balls to do that, and I'll explain some of that in just a second. But first of all, let's talk about how we do it. What you do is you're going to hold your strands together, whether you're using 2 strands or 3 strands or 4 strands, or however many strands of yarn you're going to use. And you do exactly the same. You make your slip knot and you pull your yarn through. And then you just crochet exactly the same as you would if you were using 1 strand. Some patterns will call for 2 strands, some for 3, and some for 4. And you'll do everything exactly the same as you would when you're crocheting normally. One thing to remember: if you're crocheting a pattern that calls for a bulky yarn, but you want to substitute 2 or 3 worsted weights or sport weight or other yarns, make sure that you make a swatch so that you know that what you're working with, your yarn, is going to work for that pattern that you're working with. Okay, so you're just going to crochet exactly the same as you would. So if you're wanting to substitute yarns, it's a good choice. Now, one thing that you can do is, like I said, you can roll your yarn into different balls so that you can work with them without knots. Another thing that you can do is, if you're working with just one color, you can pull from the end of the skein and from the front of the skein if you're just working with one color and 2 strands. This is a really great technique. It keeps you from having to buy 2 balls of yarn if you only need 1. And you do it exactly the same, holding your yarns together and chaining and working on your project exactly the same as you would with 1 strand. And again, you'll want to make a swatch if you're substituting. If a pattern calls for a bulky or a chunky and you want to use 2 or 3 strands of yarn, make you a little swatch, measure, and make sure that it's going to work for that pattern that you're trying to do. Also remember that not all worsted weight yarns are the same. For example, a Simply Soft is a little bit thinner than, say, a worsted weight. This is Red Hearts with Love. And these over here are just 3 different types of worsted weight yarns. And like I said, you're just going to hold those strands together and crochet exactly as you would if you were just holding 1 strand together. Now, another good reason to work with more than 1 color or 1 strand of yarn is if you do want some different colors in there. For instance, you may want Christmas colors or fall colors or Easter colors. This looks a little Valentine-ish with the pink and the red. That's a good reason to do that. If a pattern calls for a chunky black and you want to make pink and red, put those 2 together. Just make sure that it fits right for the pattern. Another thing is, if you're looking to make a nice thick rug or mat, it's good to use 3 or 4 strands of worsted weight, because if it's going to be on the floor, you want to be able to wash it. And so that's another good choice of a way to do that. So, like I said at the beginning, you crochet exactly the same way you would. You can roll it into balls, or you can pull from 2 ends of the skein or skein. It depends on what part of the country you're from, I think, how you say that. We always said skein. But you're just going to crochet exactly the same. Make sure you're using a bigger hook. Do your slip knot exactly the same. Chaining exactly the same. and crocheting exactly the same. It's not tricky. It's not confusing. It's really easy, and it's a great technique for lots of things. And it's also a great technique for substituting colors and textures. Sometimes I'll add a fuzzy texture or a fun fur texture, and it will mix in with the different colors and different textures that I'm doing, and it can be a lot of fun. I do recommend when you're stitching with 2 or 3 or 4 strands of yarn that you do try to use a big hook and stitch a little bit looser, because they can get really, really stiff, which is what we want them to do in some cases. But you can see it's a good sturdy way to stitch.